welcome to today's edition of The Public Square. I'm Alan C. Duncan, producer of the show, joined today by Dave Zanotti, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate, and Dr. Jeff Sanders. We're going to have a modern history lesson today, but we're going to start with a question.
So the question is, how did it come to this?
This is why we can't have nice things.
That's right. How did it come to this? Listeners from all over the country and people everywhere we go, whatever state we're in, have the same sort of look of suspended animation, a look of shocked disbelief, walking around saying, what is going on? There's nothing familiar about what's happening in the electoral process right now. There's a sense of tremendous dis-ease and confusion. And people are seriously losing sleep over this. So I suddenly felt like I was in the middle of a Geico commercial. Remember that one Geico commercial where there was somebody with like purple hair or blue hair or something? And you're too young. I'm looking at Melanie, somebody save me. And it's the Geico commercial where they're trying to say how you don't become like your parents. So
is there a gecko in it?
No. This is the one with the
doctor.
Progressive. Progressive.
So it wasn't Geico. It's Progressive. Okay, it's the Progressive commercial.
Those are the best commercials on television.
Trying to keep people from becoming their parents. Is that what it is? So there's this thing where everyone goes past the person with blue hair, and the guy says, "We all see it. We all see it." And the idea, of course, you're not supposed to say anything. That's what I feel is happening in this election right now. All right, and I think we're basically maybe we title the broadcast "We All See It" because it's no, you're not crazy. It is crazy. The election system right now, where we are, the whole process is nuts.
It is crazy. I don't know if I've ever been in an environment where everyone feels like everyone on the other side has blue hair, though. They don't want to talk about anyone on their side. Everyone's but your guy, but your gal, but. There's always nothing but rebuttals.
But before we even get to that, I'm talking about the process.
Oh, yeah. Well, the process has been ignored in some cases, right?
This is
there's a process?
Which seems to be the process.
We all see it.
The lack
We
thereof.
all see it.
It reminds me of being on the playground. Sometimes you make up the rules as you go along so that you can benefit from them. Not that I ever did that.
But the idea,
some kids did.
Or it's like playing Monopoly at somebody else's house, and all of a sudden they make like 3 moves around free parking or something, and you go, "What just happened here?" So don't you own it? That was house rules.
House rules.
Well,
house rules.
It's Calvin Ball from Calvin and Hobbes. They just make up the rules as they go. Anything goes.
Or it's, what was it? Drew Carey had that impromptu
Whose
show.
line is it?
Whose line is it anyhow? Right? Where
so good.
The points don't matter. Okay, so it's 500 points and they don't matter. All right, so it's like what in the world? So clearly, I'm not sure that we even need to try to do an update on how crazy all of this is yet. All right.
Problem is, crazy gets redefined every other day.
And I got to thinking about this. I said, okay, so is this the craziest we've ever seen? Now, I think in modern times, this is, I think, right now where we are in process. Understand, we're not talking about personalities. We're not even using names yet. We're just talking about the process. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I thought, let's take a second and back this up a little bit. Things have gotten weird in the past, but this isn't the only weird one. But this isn't the only time we've been surprised. We've been living kind of in a revolutionary sort of era in regards to elections, and we could take them way back. But the first one would be when television hit. You take a look at the 1960 debate, and you have the first televised debates between Kennedy and Nixon. Mm-hmm. And that basically stopped the world and defined everything. That was monumental. It was the election in that regard. So there's a big shock to the electoral system, a big shock to the process. So we've seen shocks before.
We have, and when you talk about that in 1960, all eyes would have been glued onto the television to listen, to analyze, to discuss. But that's not how today works. Today's in 10-second, 15-second sound bites. The debate was a big deal because it was something that all eyes went to. It was their one source.
It was black and white.
It was
Now
also
we pick our source.
I'm going to say that it was a far more mature audience. You're talking about the World War II generation that had a very good grasp of reality. And they were
based on experience.
Based on experience, and they were far more literate. And so their analytical, critical thinking skills were far better than a good portion of our population today, in my opinion.
Well, but if you combine the lack of critical thinking skills with the
today.
lack of understanding of what the system is what the
Yes.
rules are, what the system is supposed to be.
Right.
Sure, the TV era was a game changer, but I feel like where we are now is people have thrown out the rule book, and they're just making things up as they go along.
All right. So I'm asking myself, is this a unique experience? And so I'm trying to go forward and think to my mind, okay, so 68. And then we got into the period of LBJ. That was a pretty difficult situation.
Talking about the late 60s.
Yeah, where the president of the United States decided to not seek a second term. Now, remember, think about how you would feel. You watched Kennedy on television shot. You watched Oswald get shot. Now you come into a new presidency, and the thought is, well, Johnson is automatically going to be reelected. I mean, after all, he's the heir of the Kennedy administration, and who's going to fire him? People are still reeling from the losses. And then all of a sudden, you're in the realm of Martin Luther King Jr. being shot, Bobby Kennedy Jr. being shot.
In the same year, 68.
Right? And think about this. I mean, it's like people are saying, well, who's going to get shot next? And then LBJ drops out of the race. Now, that was pretty...
Yeah, he dropped out first, and then you had the two assassinations.
Yes, I'm sorry, put it in the right order.
And then you had the Democrat convention that summer,
which
was literally a riot.
I mean, it was literally
the city of Chicago almost blew up.
Yeah, in 68. That's pretty crazy stuff.
And Johnson backing out of the race was not as we are experiencing now, because it was earlier in the year. It was a different context than what we're seeing now.
I think 68 would have shaken people to their core in the feeling of what in the world is going on. Okay, so they choose the law and order candidate, and they elect Richard Nixon.
In a three-way race, by the way.
Yes, with...
Because you had the vice president, the sitting vice president running, who was Hubert Humphrey. Then you had another Democrat candidate running.
Did anybody ever have a more unusual voice than Hubert Humphrey, though?
Well, you know what?
It's hard to impersonate.
I can remember my parents telling me that they liked him, but that he just wouldn't shut up. and you know, all of my family, my parents.
Well, there's someone there's someone who wants to be president now that has a unique voice as well.
Yeah. And then you had George Wallace as an independent candidate, and he won pretty much the entire South. And so Nixon was able just to skate
Wait a minute, did Wallace get shot in that election or the next one? It was the next one.
72 in Laurel, Maryland.
Yeah.
And he was doing very well in the polls, by the way. And then forgot the guy's name, but shot him, and he was paralyzed for the rest of his life.
I keep hearing about all this gun issues of the day, and we just mentioned 4 people that were shot.
We could keep going. Right. So they elect the law and order candidate, who then has to fire his vice president, Spiro Agnew,
a couple of years
because
later.
of scandal. And then Watergate hits in 73, and after Nixon is reelected, and all of a sudden we're in a situation where the president walks away. He resigns. He resigns at the fear of impeachment and conviction.
I'll never forget it.
Gerald Ford, who is like the right guard from Michigan University. All right, this is the guy who gets elected out. I think it was Grand Rapids. I think it was
Grand Rapids. He was a member of the U.S. House. For many years.
And like he is the most vanilla, non-controversial potential candidate you could have, who has no rule breaking anywhere. I don't know if he ever even was offsides when he played one time. Certainly never held anybody when he was a lineman in Michigan.
Yeah.
This guy is as clean as the driven snow can possibly be. All right.
Yeah.
There he is. And he becomes president. And then, of course, he pardons Nixon, which blows the world up again. because people are so concerned about whether that was the right thing to do. And he narrowly loses this election by about a total of, well, it was a handful of votes in Ohio, Virginia, and Hawaii. If a handful of votes had turned around, he would have been reelected.
Mm-hmm.
But Jimmy Carter becomes president.
Wait. You said a handful of votes in Ohio, right?
Yeah.
You know, I just want everybody to know there are some people in Ohio here who voted for Jimmy Carter.
Here at the American Mission Center.
Yes, in 1976, right? Yeah, I just want to remind everybody of that.
But the American Mission Center wasn't here. We didn't start till 1980, so I guess that individual would be considered exempt at this stage in the game.
You know what's interesting?
You can't grandfather in liability over that much time.
We walked through all that history, confession time, I guess, because I'm going through my head. Forrest Gump helped me learn a good deal of that history. The movie, right? I mean, the assassinations, Watergate. Think of all the things that were in there.
That's the title of this show.
Yes.
Okay, the history of America according to Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Magic legs, Lieutenant Dan. Okay. All right. So here we are.
Run, Forrest. Run.
Yeah. So the point is, there's been a lot of stuff. Now, we can keep going. Let's go up to the year 2008.
Oh, must we?
Yeah, let's go to 2008.
All right.
We're in an election period where there is such a sense in inevitability that the first black president has to be elected, that Andy Griffith and Ron Howard are doing videos apologizing for Mayberry and basically saying that their penance for this is to make sure that Barack Obama gets elected. All right, that's just a fact. I didn't invent this. It's not prejudicial. It just happened. It's such a period of inevitability that the yard signs that are out across the country don't even say Barack Obama's name.
It says the symbol.
They just have a symbol or the word
hope and change.
Or the word change. I talk about radical technologies, but it took a step farther. They spent $2 billion that year to do something that had never been done before in regards to online voting tracking and online marketing that had never done before. And they won that election walking away.
All right, I have to call a timeout now, but we're going to pick the story up right there when we come back for more of the Public Square. Stay with us.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
Welcome back to the Public Square and our modern history lesson today. Let's pick right back up in the year 2008.
So Barack Obama shocks the world and wins with hope and change. And then, interestingly enough, MIT issues the report to explain to everybody what their micro-targeting and online stuff looked like, and it was revolutionary. They spent $2 billion in 2008 on this stuff. And then it was so successful that they immediately rehired all the leaders of that project and kept them to start the re-election campaign. I think they rehired them before the inauguration of the first term. That's how confident they were that what they had was such a cutting-edge reality on how to get voters to show up. And you know that 4 years later, they got 4 million fewer votes.
They got less.
Fewer votes
Still won.
than they got in 2008. And not only did they win, they won with a higher number of electoral college votes because that group of people who had now had $4 billion invested in them, and this is widely reported in the media. We're not making these numbers up. Look at MIT Tech Review. It's all in there.
The MIT study. How many times have we went through that?
All right. And when you take a look at that $4 billion expense, media reports said it this way. They not only knew, the Obama campaign people not only knew which precincts they had to win in which key states and by how many votes, but on election night, they felt confident. Not only were they winning those precincts, they could almost say out loud the names of the people that were showing up to vote. That's how powerful their micro-targeting had become through online access and scraping data and building files and spending $4 billion. They were taking the information off of the box top of your cable system back when you had cable boxes, and they were literally tracking the records in key precincts, buying the data from the cable companies to know what programs people were watching in what households and what commercials they were receiving. And so how they could basically pull that and then coalesce it with or combine it with their social media stuff, and then send people literally to their doors knocking with a set of questions based upon the interest they'd already presumed these people had. And then having someone come to the door and say, because of all that, will you please vote for Barack Obama? That's how good they were. No one had ever seen anything like that before. But he couldn't be president forever.
But they could stay together forever.
So at the end of the second term,
They're funded forever.
at the end of the second term, this guy comes down the escalator. Now, what's the point of going through this history? It's been weird and sometimes weirder and sometimes weirder. Guy comes down the escalator and the whole progressive left laughs out loud. All right? They're like,
I remember.
they couldn't possibly imagine that this guy could win the nomination for the Republican Party. They couldn't believe it. And he's up against all these different candidates, and the evangelicals basically hand him the nomination, not by choice, but by having two candidates in Rubio and Cruz split the biggest portion of the base and create a lane for Donald Trump to come forward and win with a plurality of the votes in state after state. By the time we get to South Carolina, it was a three-person race, and Trump had all the money, but there were two left. Rubio and Cruz still had billionaires in their back pockets to support them, but they had split and fractured the vote so bad that Trump captured the momentum and became the nominee.
And the math wouldn't work for allow either one of them to win, because by the time Trump swept it all in South Carolina, which was not a winner-take-all state, but he did take them all because he won every congressional district and statewide. But what I remember about that as well is obviously the escalator, but the first debate they had in the 2016 campaign cycle on the Republican side was in Cleveland, Ohio. And it was like Thanksgiving. They had the kids table and the adults table. So they had the pre-debate for the kids that really weren't responsible for anything. And then they had the big boy debate and big girl debate. And that's when all the candidates were asked, will you support the nominee of the Republican Party,
and
no matter who it is?
By the juvenile commentators, including Brett Baer and Megyn Kelly at Fox, was, this is a raise your hand question. Somebody says to me, this is a raise your hand question, I'm literally walking off the stage.
I'm going to laugh.
I don't even like it when pastors tell me to say amen.
Oh, that's manipulation. I know. I can't
honestly, if you
stand
earn
that.
an amen, I'll give you one.
Yeah,
With all eyes closed.
Yeah, I'm not raising.
So they ask, and everyone on the stage but one person raised their hand.
It was over right there. Wasn't it?
And people. Dave Chappelle has an amazing bit about this. Obviously, we can't play it here, but he talks about how Donald Trump got the American people to believe in him because he's the first one that came from inside the house and told them what was happening in there and what they were doing.
Yeah.
And Chappelle nails it in that bit.
A couple of things to learn from that. Number one, you cannot predict the future. Only God can. All the pundits are out there saying, this and that.
And he's not predicted.
Right. And nobody saw Donald Trump coming.
No.
And then the second thing is you never underestimate your opponent. Everybody was laughing at Trump. Everybody was laughing at Biden.
Well,
right?
now before we get to Biden, let's just talk about how everyone was flipping out because Donald Trump was going to be the nominee. On the other side of the story, John Podesta, who we affectionately call the longest-serving president of the United States in all of history, because he's been running all the Democrat White Houses since Bill Clinton. He was in charge of Hillary Clinton's campaign. Surprise, surprise. Now, when George W. Bush was elected, John Podesta was out of the White House, and so he founded an organization called the Center for American Progress, and anchored it in Washington, D.C., because I don't think he liked a long drive between the White House and his office, and he figured he'd be back again. So they anchored it in Washington, D.C., and he co-founded it with, I don't know, this guy he sort of found out there, I don't know, maybe on the subway somewhere, or maybe at the Smithsonian looking at paintings. But he managed to corral George Soros to be his co-founder in regards to the Center for American Progress. And that organization became the anchor of the progressive movement. Now, in this month's monthly update, we're talking about a lot of this, and we have the actual website listed, linked in the both the online and the print version. And you can get it there, or you can just go Center for American Progress and do a search and find it right now. But when you go to the Center for American Progress, I encourage everyone listening to go to their contributor page and understand this. The driving source, the nuclear power plant of the progressive movement, particularly as it relates to controlling the White House and the administrative agencies in Washington, D.C., is CAP. It's the Center for American Progress. And you can go back to 2003 and you'll see the 21 years of their influence. And when you go to that list of their contributors, you will see all the people who are now signed up to fund their efforts.
And I have a question about that.
Those are the top donors, by the way. You'll see the top donors.
I have a question about that because you don't hear that in the mainstream media. You only hear from us talking about it and trying to expose it. But what you hear from the mainstream media is, and those folks are directly connected to the Obama campaign, to the Biden campaign, to the Clinton campaign.
John Podesta was the chief of staff for Clinton and the chief of staff for Obama. And on election night 2016, he was the spokesperson running Hillary Clinton's campaign.
But okay. Yet the mainstream media, all they want to talk about is Project 2025, which Donald Trump had, no, seriously, right? Donald Trump had nothing to do with. And again, we're not here to defend Donald Trump, but it just shows the cover-ups that take place in the media because the connections aren't made. There's no connection over here to Project 2025, Donald Trump, the campaign. He don't have people working on both. But on the other side, you've got CAP, you've got Center for American Progress that has all the tentacles connected,
right?
But no one says a word.
And they coronated Hillary Clinton. They had that entire 2016 primary process totally rigged.
And on election night, they even had sound effects of that they were going to plan on playing, and everyone was cued in. It was going to be the sound of breaking glass.
Fireworks.
No, because the idea was that she was broken the glass ceiling, and this was the first female president. So on election night, we were all a part of election coverage that night as we began to see the trend. And we saw North Carolina, and then we saw Ohio, and we saw Florida. And then the big state, the major media missed it. They were thinking it's going to be over here, over there, over here. Over there was the call on Pennsylvania. We had iVoters doing the election coverage there, had the call on Pennsylvania.
9 o'clock at night.
And we took it out across the radio networks in that read that we were working with at that time. And it was clear then 2.5 hours later, the networks reluctantly acknowledged that, in fact, Donald Trump was going to be the next president of the United States. And John Podesta came out, and he stood there, and all I could hear was the sound of broken glass everywhere. I have never seen John Podesta so completely stunned and undone as when he had to acknowledge the fact that they had lost control of the inevitable. They were absolutely certain there was no way in the world the guy coming down the escalator could ever beat Hillary Clinton. And all we can say is that for a lot of people, they were not just undone. It was the weirdest thing they'd ever seen in an election. They don't know. To this day, some of them still don't know what happened.
Dave, do you think that possibly the technology and all the technological advances that they worked through from 2008 moving forward sort of peaked and then it didn't match people's lived realities?
Melanie, there are so many elements. It's such a fascinating race to study from a point of pure objectivity as to what impacted people. I think that's quite true. I think what's also quite true is the fact that Hillary Clinton beat Hillary Clinton because in that context, entire race turned on one single phrase. irredeemable deplorables.
I was thinking it turned on one single word, and that was deplorables.
Irredeemable deplorables is what she called her opponents. And from that moment, it's like somebody began to pull the plug on all the power switches in that campaign. And the deflation was just amazing. And again, nobody saw that coming.
All right, quick break coming up. We'll be right back after that, so please stay with us for more of The Public Square.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
You're listening to The Public Square. Let me reset the table of those who are joining us in studio today. I'm Alan C. Duncan with Dave Zanotti, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate, and Dr. Jeff Sanders. Dave, I'll hand it to you.
When we were last talking about this right before the break, we were talking about John Podesta, the longest serving, affectionately known as the longest serving president of the United States. We're talking about the weirdness of elections. Right now, people are walking around in the midst of this one feeling this is the weirdest they've ever seen. Now, we'll get to that in just a second, but we want to set the stage because if you're saying this is the weirdest you've ever seen, we want to go back and explain there's been some really weird things go on in elections since the 1960s, but particularly true since 2008 forward because of the collision of all these new technologies, all the new ways we think and communicate with each other. So, but John Podesta on election night in 2016 was the most stunned human, that certainly most stunned Podesta we'd ever seen. And then you were telling me about what his name means, Jeff.
Yeah, his name's Italian, and so
now that part we figured out.
In Italian, it's actually pronounced Podesta, and it means power. It comes from the Latin word potestas, which means power. And in medieval Italian communities, the podesta was the title of the highest judicial and military magistrate. So he was actually, in the medieval world in Italy, he was the power behind the throne.
You can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, you can't. He was the guy.
Right now,
he
I'm
didn't
feeling
see all
like
the time, but he had all the power.
I'm feeling like right now I'm catching a Glenn Beck blackboard here. Okay, we're not trying.
Never watched Glenn Beck.
This is not conspiracy. This is just real.
I'm reading this from the. You can read it on any platform on the internet.
It's there. No, Italian's Italian. I got it.
I do think that Podesta and his allies did go to the blackboard when that was done, and they had to study the mistakes that were made. And obviously there were mistakes made in Wisconsin and Michigan and some of the decisions that took place in that election and how they underestimated.
They didn't get beat twice.
No, they didn't get beat twice.
So 4 years later, John Podesta, and again, we keep talking about John Podesta. He came from a lobbying firm with he and his brother. They were superpower lobbyists in 2003. John Podesta went solely in the realm of the nonprofit partnership with George Soros. That's the funding base. And again, I want to encourage you to go to the Center for American Progress. Our donors, they list their major donors. A lot of them are listed anonymously, which is legal. It's not illegal. But you can see the ones that are there. And by the way, I think after this program, please screenshot it because you'll probably find that it disappears.
Yeah, and you also notice that the educators of the Youth of America are listed on there as large donors. The AFT, the American Federation for Teachers, and the National Education Association.
And just to help the listeners, you're not going to find it at the top.
Right.
You have to scroll all the way to the bottom of the website. In really super tiny print, it says Our Supporters.
Yeah, so do you have that pulled up? We're pulling it up right here. It just coincidentally kind of interesting. Was I mistaken or did I see Comcast on there?
But
you'll notice it's not listed NBC Universal Comcast. Mm-hmm. It's just listed Comcast. Oh, it's the cable company that happens to own NBC, MSNBC, CNBC.
Microsoft Corporation.
I think if you keep looking, you're going to find Bill Gates' name.
You'll find members of the alphabet.
Yeah.
Members of the alphabet, not letters of the alphabet, members of the alphabet. But one thing you said is they don't lose twice. And here's the other thing I don't think that they do, unless I'm missing it. I feel like the right finds a way to fight publicly, right? There's disagreements publicly. We've seen that in the past week with Donald Trump and some elected officials from Georgia.
Hang on. Melanie's paralyzed. She's got her finger on the screen. It's not a touch screen. What are you seeing that's got you stopped?
One of the supporters is Google.
Oh yeah.
It's just
They're members of the alphabet. They're all there. I mean, try and Google some certain phrases of
Apple
recent
Incorporated.
events that aren't popping up.
Right.
Like Trump assassination.
Yeah. So, but I don't think that the left fights publicly. I think they fight. I think they fight bitterly behind closed doors. I think they get mad at each other, but they don't let you. They're like a good team. I mean, do you see a good team fight on the sidelines during a game? Now, you may see them fight in preseason. You may see them fight in practice sometimes when cameras are allowed in. But when it's time to play the game, the best teams don't fight with one another.
Unless you're Travis Kelce and Andy Reid, but yeah.
No, that wasn't fighting. Andy Reid took it, and I don't know why he took it, but he did take it, and he let someone vent. I think that would be a difference. Reid didn't respond back.
I think we're heading to an 1850 episode right there. I feel that coming right now. All right, so 1850 Main Street, something else we can listen to. All right, let's go back, though. There's another reason why they don't fight in public. Nobody wants to cross the money.
Right.
Because when you look at this list of supporters, what you find very quickly is there are some of those gigantic multinational billionaires, and we don't even have the anonymous names. The ones that are listed alone are monster donors. And so what basically has happened over the years is that the Center for American Progress has, through the work of Soros and that billionaire group, has hollowed out the Democrat Party and basically said, if you want a seat at the table, at the big boys table, the big girls table, you want the adult table, you better play along. If you do, there's great potential for you because we got a lot of money and we are prepared to spend billions every election cycle and we want your help, but you got to play along.
Aren't these the same people who say we should have less money in politics?
Yeah. Yeah, you notice they don't say that as loudly as they used to anymore.
Just making sure.
So
They also on their website basically describe themselves. They're dedicated to improving the lives of all Americans through bold, progressive ideas, as well as strong leadership and concerted action. Our aim is not just to change the conversation, but to change the country.
the radical transformation of America, that's what Barack Obama's second inaugural address was all about. About changing us from the language of the Declaration of Independence to the language of a collectivist administrative state. Read the words, it's all there. And so, but they don't lose twice. So they lost to the guy coming down the escalator the first time. Second time around, they pooled their resources. They went back to a ground game. They recognized the 5 states that Donald Trump had won. He had won by very small margins, 10,000 votes or less. And those 5 states catapulted him into what he perceived, Trump perceived, as a landslide. And for 4 years, he talked about that landslide. Well, meanwhile, the people back at the Center for American Progress and all their allies were saying, landslide my foot. And they went ahead and they joined forces with Silicon Valley and Hollywood and Wall Street and all those players. And they dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the specific precincts that they needed in those 5 states. And Donald Trump lost every one of them. They flipped those small margins. And in some cases where Trump had won by 10, they won by 10. In some states like Georgia, they blew the Trump campaign's doors off. But that's where Stacey Abrams was. And before she got there, she was on the board of Center for American Progress Action. Oh, what a coincidence. As was Ron Klain, who then would move on to become the chief of staff for Joe Biden's administration. Follow the bouncing ball. This is what they do for a living. And they do it very, very well. And you know what else? It's all legal. I'm not calling anybody here un-American or illegal. I'm not calling any of that into question. What they did in plain sight. And the reason that they won is because no one challenged them at the level of commitment and strategy where they were.
And we do feel that there were some rules of the game that were changed. We talked about it last time on the Public Square.
Bent?
Yes. because of COVID.
Or marginalized.
The excuse of the pandemic was used.
And
but
it forced states to go back and look at their statutes.
Yeah, you need to go back and look at the statutes, but it's also a thing where both sides need to play by the rules. So in some points, I would say it could be like, when football allowed the forward pass, it'd be like saying, no, we don't believe in the forward pass. We're not going to throw. We're just going to run the ball. Well,
sounds like Woody Hayes.
It's not. It's not going to work in today's game. It's just reality. You got to play by the rules.
So they didn't lose the same way twice. They seldom lose twice, and they came back and they capitalized on two realities. The first was COVID. They used it to their advantage, and in so doing, what they did is they cut a deal. They cut the deal. And they brought Joe Biden to the nomination. Now, they did the deal with Congressman Clyburn and the Black Caucus and the Black Leadership of America. And they said, okay, we've got a contested group of people here. Now, Joe Biden wasn't winning primaries. He was finishing like 7th. He was not doing very well in that process. But when they realized they were headed for a dogfight that wasn't going to get them anywhere in competition among their candidates, they came to a place where they made a settlement. They settled on Biden being their candidate, and enough of the coalition of the Democrat delegates got together, and Biden became their selected candidate. And so they cleared the field for Biden. And the deals were made behind closed doors, and that field was cleared. Then it's affectionately said they sent him to the basement. Well, they didn't send him to the basement. It just, because of COVID, they utilized COVID to keep the candidate at home.
Sequestered.
They kept them sequestered. And everybody said, well, it's COVID. What are you going to do?
Well, yeah, it gave them the opportunity to appear almost kind in doing that. We're following the rule. We're doing the right thing.
Yes.
We're being compassionate by staying home. So you got to kind of virtue signal even as you were doing that.
And the question we've got to ask was there more to it than that?
Well, that's the question on the table, and we'll get back to that when we return for more of The Public Square after this short break.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to The Public Square.
So let's return to Joe Biden in the basement or at his home in the campaign. And or out in those amazing rallies where you had like a bunch of cars and you beeped your horn or something. I don't know.
That's how they were doing comedy shows back then too.
So we've got the COVID situation. They maximized COVID to, in essence, take Biden off the field. But then they also maximized it, and this was nothing short of brilliant. They maximized it as a means whereby they could run in the creases and the seams of election laws and utilize mail-in balloting, early balloting in ways that it had, and absentee ballots in a way they had never been done before, and overwhelm the system with a 50% volume of mail-in ballots, which no one had ever seen before. And they overwhelmed the system, and they basically created an environment, as even though Donald Trump got significantly more votes in his second run, they got more. And it was the methodology by which they got them. Now, people are going to be arguing about that as long as we argue about Kennedy buying Cook County in 1960 to become the president. Okay, that's a perpetual argument that will never be resolved. The fact is, it doesn't change anything. The thing we always say to people, you got to remember about election laws. And if this is a repeat, I apologize. Election laws have a ticking clock connected to them. It's a very unusual arena of law. When someone breaks other forms of law, there's a statute of limitation that lasts years.
Yep.
In election law, the clock is ticking in real time. And if the offense is not validated in the judicial process in time to stop the process, which is weeks, then once the person's sworn into office and inaugurated, you can't throw them back out again because now you're overturning an election. And so it tends to be that the person with the fastest getaway car gets away in regards to election law. So it's a different form of law. So you can be racing right on the edge, but if you're not caught, you're technically not illegal. So it's a very different arena of law. And I think people are now suddenly realizing that okay, this is a different set of circumstances. So they didn't lose twice, but they kept Joe Biden, they kept him at home. Now, Joe Biden comes out and delivers an inaugural speech, which, interestingly enough, John Podesta, at 11 o'clock before the 1:20 inaugural time, issued a statement on the speech before Biden made it, which I thought was rather intriguing. I guess they were just wanting to make sure that Center for American Progress was the defining brand on the administration. But in any case, now Joe Biden's president. So here's the question. Was he really in his home during the election because of COVID? Or did they already know that there was a diminishment in his capacity at that stage in the game?
I think they utilized the best strategy they had to win. I think that's what it was all about. It's all about winning. So that was the best strategy to win. Whatever excuse can be levied to allow that strategy to be implemented, you're going to do. I mean, every team, when in a sporting event, every good team preps. They scout and look at who their opponent is. And they knew who their opponent was. And they knew they didn't beat that opponent, Donald Trump, in 2016 by having the strategy they had, so they had to change it.
Here's the second element of this that I think is critical. Podesta, Soros, Cap, all of their allies, they've got a candidate. They're running a campaign. They may have their toes on the line of the law, but they're running a campaign in clear sight. We don't see Biden very often, mostly eating ice cream cones. Again, nothing illegal about that. And they create an environment whereby they overwhelm the system through mail-in ballots and they win the election. At what point in time did people really come to terms with the fact that Joe Biden was having serious cognitive problems and health problems? At what point in time?
Well, even tandem to that, even prior to having any diminished capacity, Joe Biden is Joe Biden. He wasn't popular enough to get anything on his own at any stage of any campaign. So he was the carry-along candidate from the beginning. Whether the timing of it, in terms of them understanding his diminishment, was at the time he was elected, before or after, clearly throughout that term, he continued to diminish.
Well, there were video clips going around of him smelling children's hair. It was almost a joke. That was pretty early. He was falling upstairs. He fell on a bicycle.
There was the corn pop thing, that some of those unusual trailing off stories type
Lifeguard.
thing. Okay. Lifeguard stuff.
People have been commenting on it for years.
Years, long before, 4 years ago. The observers in the Democrat Party saw that every time Hillary Clinton opened her mouth in 2016, they lost votes. I mean, looking back on it, they saw that. They don't want to take a chance again with Joe Biden.
Okay.
Keep him, figuratively speaking, in the basement, keep a mask on him, keep him silent.
Yeah.
So that the American people don't see him falling down like they saw Hillary Clinton fall down.
That's right. I remember that.
And say all kinds of crazy things like they heard her say stuff.
We all forgot about that.
She was falling down days before the election.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, remember? Now I can still see that in my mind.
Right around Labor Day, too, especially.
Are we jumping too far ahead to ask if that's a strategy that the Democrats might use with Kamala Harris?
Before we get there, we've got to bring in this next element. None of this is possible without a cooperative media.
The cover-up.
None of this is possible.
And a cooperative social media.
Yes.
True.
Well, and media, I would talk about,
which is more
the corporate
powerful,
media
actually.
and the social media combined together. And this is my personal beef. So, direct the criticism at me. But we're forced here to as a research, media, and public policy organization, we have to read a lot of media. We have to scan media. We have to review media. We have to look at a lot of things. And constantly, every day, it's a routine around people are looking at 6, 12, 18 different sources. We have to divide them up. And when they all line up in a monolithic fashion, and it's just over and over and over again, the stories they won't cover, the things they won't say, the things that they all say in the same words and in the same language. This goes beyond media bias. This is way past the bias that maybe we would have seen in the 60s. Maybe even more than the bias that we saw in 2008, because a lot of people, Chris Matthews with the tingle down my leg, at least he was being transparent and honest. He really wanted to see America elect a black president. Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with it at all.
And expressed it transparently. This is different.
Oh, it's different when GovTrack deletes pages that calls the 2024 Democrat nominee the most liberal senator in the United States Senate. They deleted that. It's intentional when the term border czar was used by every major media outlet in
and a piece of
referring
legislation
to Vice President Harris. But now all of a sudden everyone says she was never the border czar.
And is that being scrubbed?
But hang on now.
Probably.
But before we go too far, let's before into the specifics, which are all legit. Let's back up on the process. How in the world can the American corporate media, which is into everybody's business, knows everybody's sock drawer, everybody's IRS filings, how can you have a process where someone becomes the nominee for president of the United States without ever securing a vote?
Gotta take a break. And who knows, maybe we'll figure out the answer to Dave's question during the break. Probably not. But we will come back on most of these stations for our fifth and final segment of The Public Square. If your station is one of those that has to cut away, you can hear the remainder of this program at thepublicsquare.com or on our free mobile app. Look for the lamppost.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
Welcome back to the Public Square. We're finishing up our modern history lesson today, trying to figure out how did we get to where we are in the current political election cycle right now. Dave, it's been helpful to walk through this history lesson today, and I think the final few minutes are going to be helpful as well.
How in the world can this process have gone this far unchallenged? Help me understand something here. We've had crazy in elections going back to the 60s. Nobody's ever seen this. And I think that's why people are so unsettled. You have someone who, when they ran for the presidency, was one of the first candidates to drop out. Then you're in a situation where Joe Biden runs as the incumbent, is largely unchallenged in every state, secures quickly and readily, easily, as the incumbent president, the amount of necessary delegates through the electoral process in 50 state elections and primaries to become the certified, legal, legitimate, bona fide Democrat nominee for president of the United States. Everything's right. All the process is straight up. Then he decides he's not going to run. Okay, so what's the next step? The next step isn't the Democrat National Committee. It isn't a set of rule books. It isn't a set of laws. It isn't a set of state laws. It's not in the United States Code. All of a sudden, Joe Biden decides that Kamala Harris is going to take his place at the top of the ticket, and everybody goes, okay. She's never run in a primary in this process.
She never won a single delegate when she was running in 2020.
And she withdrew before Iowa even took place.
Yeah.
So they could have pulled President Biden out, or he could have pulled himself out earlier.
Right.
Not after 14 million people cast their vote in the process.
Well, because you have a letter from Joe Biden on the 8th of July saying it would be wrong for me to disenfranchise the people that voted for me. I'm not going to get out of this. And then 2 weeks later.
Yeah, so what?
Changes
right?
mind. But back to...
Do you think that they're playing on the idea that Americans know so little about civil government that they would automatically think that if the president resigns from the campaign, that there's something in the law that says the vice president automatically occupies the position? I mean, you think there's
No, I don't. I think they're so arrogant that they don't care what the American people think. If they cared, the Democrat leadership would have allowed the primary process to take place with other Democrats challenging Joe Biden. No one challenged Joe Biden because the people at the top said you can't.
So there's no fear in their mechanism. And why is there no fear in their mechanism? One, because the corporate media, which did not exist in the 1960s, the media in the 1960s was broken and brokered among big players who had big money in regional media outlets. Now, they were as political as they've ever been. We've been political back to Horace Greeley in the war. We've been political back to Benjamin Franklin in our media. The media's never been apolitical. That's not the point. But they've never been concentrated and controlled by corporate entities the way they are right now. And monolithically, they have no fear of the media, which is why they can do these things that are so untold, unheard of, without any fear of transparency or ethics, because they know the giant corporate media. That's Comcast, that's ABC Disney, that's Universal, NBC, that's CBS, the WAPO, Washington Post, New York Times, Associated Press will all cover for them.
Were JFK and Richard Nixon as far apart on a vision for America as the two parties seem like they are today?
No, not hardly.
No.
Not hardly. In fact, Kennedy in some ways was considered more conservative than Nixon on certain things because Kennedy wouldn't go for wage and price controls and Nixon did. I mean, it was there was
They were both friends too, by the way.
Yeah, they were both
served in
senators.
Congress.
You mean they shook hands before a debate?
Yes, Nixon was a member of the House, and
Yeah.
then he was the sitting vice president for 8 years, and he and Kennedy were friends.
Yeah.
I suspected that would be the answer you would give, and I think that's part of the problem that we're facing today is that it's two radically different competing visions for America.
And if you've got the world split that well, and you think you've got the biggest stick in the game, which is the corporate media monolithically behind you, you can continue to run to the edges, make stuff up because no one's going to hold you into account. And that's what I think people are so inside. They're so disturbed about. This. We're not even to the selection of who you vote for or don't vote for. We're talking about, wait a second, how did we get here? How did this happen? Because now we're heading into a convention. Kamala Harris is going to pick a vice president. Out of what process? She just by fiat, she's going to select. They're going to go. She's the nominee out of nowhere without ever having won a primary. They're going to have what is not even going to be an open convention. Now it's going to be a coronation. Okay, it's all set. It's all wired.
Well, they already voted for her to be the nominee.
Yeah.
I guess that was a poll over the telephone, right?
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and
So now we got a telephone poll. Well, who made that one up? Was that like in subset rule 34B?
They changed the rules so it would work.
It's in the rules for the Democrat Party.
So there are no rules except we make them up because the only rule is power.
Because we trust in parties too much as a society to begin with.
And there's not going to be any accountability because the media is not going to jump screaming through and saying, what about the 14 million disenfranchised people?
Mike Johnson's tried to make that point, but who listens to him? Who even knows who he is?
I've heard a former president of the Senate in California make the same point.
Really?
Democrat.
Good.
And we've done this history lesson. We're trying to get, how did we get here today? Maybe I missed it. I'm pressing buttons over here. Did we even mention that a presidential candidate was almost assassinated several weeks ago?
Yeah.
And you know why we didn't? Because it almost feels like a few weeks ago was just the end of a Netflix episode.
I thought, yeah.
For 7 days, everyone was riveted on that issue. And then suddenly it was done and all this other stuff. And you know why? Because the people in charge of the corporate media were happy to give it 72 hours, but no one was going to take it any farther because they want to make darn sure that guy doesn't get elected.
It feels just that the Democrats had a card to play, and they played it. They're out with Biden, in with Kamala, and that dominates the news cycle.
What's the story next week?
I
wonder.
That's the shiny new toy. And then here's the thing: how short's the field? How short is the field? We're
less than 2 months.
Yeah, we are. Before voting starts, you are talking about weeks now. And so this is where the consultants, this takes us back to the Center for American Progress and the consulting groups and the boardrooms of the corporate media. They may have one or two more plays up their sleeve. But the point of this conversation is, this is why we have to understand when we're being played. Both sides can play.
Yep.
Both sides can play us. The greatest protection we have in America against an out-of-control election for the administrative branch, for the executive branch, for the presidency, is to return our focus to the states and to Congress.
Amen.
The framers understood these kind of factionalized times would come, and that's why they set up a multi-tiered government with multi-levels. It's why we're focused so much on ivoters.com. It's why I want to encourage everybody to visit ivoters.com as we get closer to the election. By the end of September, it'll be live in all 50 states. Should be, hopefully. All right. Rob, looking at it?
No, it's going to be. It's going to. Yeah.
Yes. And this is where we need to defend ourselves and our families from people that are so very powerful at the top that they do tend, in the end, to see a lot of other people as pawns. The way to make your voice count is to understand where your vote makes the most impact. That's to the states and to the Congress.
There's another important element, though, because you would be amazed at how many people aren't even registered to vote, who are engaged in the conversation, who talk about what's happening in the country. But when you ask them, are you registered to vote? Do you plan on voting? No, they're not registered to vote. I don't think we should take anyone for granted in family, friends, network. I think each of us needs to be reaching out. If you know someone who just recently got married or recently turned 18 or whatever the circumstance is that allows them to make a change in their voter registration or to register for the first time, it doesn't do squat if you're not registered to vote.
It's going to do it for us today on The Public Square. Hope you enjoyed listening. And if you found it helpful, please share with a friend. And we hope to see you back here again next time for more of The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.